shit. You know why? Point number A, I have to follow that presentation, which was awesome, right? Dave, amazing job. Where are you, Dave? All right. Point B, I'm a product owner. To make things worse, my dragon maker is sitting right over there. So our next weekly team meeting is going to be a little awkward, I suppose. So thanks, Dave. All right. So as the final presentation of this amazing, amazing event, by the way, Mike Johnson from Mass TLC, this was awesome. Thank you very much. And big hand for Mike, please. And our main conference organizer, part-time mic runner, thank you very much for doing what you do. We were thinking we'd do something a little less cerebral, less intense. And trust me, I took so much notes. I wasn't quite sure whether I should be taking notes or practicing my presentation in mind. A lot of conflict going on in there. So we thought we'd talk about a little bit something less cerebral, more on the sort of the artsy side of data science and machine learning, and talk about communication, a subject matter that is sorely needed to be talked about, but in where we are with the hype cycle on ML and DS, something that doesn't get as much attention. So before I sort of jump into it, I want to sort of summarize to you what my problem is. My problem is that my slides don't move forward. Yeah, screw this. Shit. That's my problem. How many people have seen this? Perspective, right? It's awesome. Of course, it's not mine. I can't take credit for this. But as a product owner, as I am trying to communicate to my business stakeholders, when I want to make them see a duck, they see a rabbit. When I want them to see a rabbit, they see ducks. Sometimes they see neither, and that's my problem. My problem is, how do I take the amazing work that my dragon makers do and turn around to my business stakeholders and make them see things, so that, to go to Sim's point, we can get the investments we need, we can get the support we need to experiment, to invest in building better ML infrastructure, to build better processes towards a more mature ML process, and so on and so forth. So that's where I'm coming from. A little bit more detail about what is it that I do. My name is Vinod Kumar. I work at Salesforce. We're part of Salesforce through acquisition. We were known as Demandware. We make e-commerce software. So what that means is there are about 3,000 sites out there, e-commerce sites out there, some of which you may have bought stuff from, where all the data flows through our systems. So we kind of see what you guys buy. So if you've ever bought a pair of Puma shoes or Adidas shoes, thank you very much. X% of that transaction was our top line revenue. So that's how we make money, by the way. I run an analytics and intelligence team. Our core job, the team's job, is to work with our customers, who are mostly retailers, to help them find growth opportunities in their business, leveraging data analytics, machine learning, data science, and so on. So that's what we do. So our roles are inherently customer-facing, facing retailers, branded manufacturers. That's the space where we're coming from. So that's what we do. Before that, the team is relatively new. Before that, I was a product manager, so I did build products, so I have a little bit of product management background. I've done some implementation consulting, so a mixed bag of a lot of stuff. So besides being a humble brag, I also wanted you guys to know what the context of my presentation is, where all this content is coming from. I am not an academic. I'm not a data scientist, but I've been working with data for several years in different contexts, is what I wanted to share. So the presentation is very structured, in a typical structured fashion. I wanted to share with you a little bit more about the situation of challenges in communication, of machine learning output, data science output. Talk about what's the complication in that situation. It's not a straightforward situation. There's a little bit of complication there. And followed by the type of approaches that has worked. We've tested, used different mechanisms of making sure that we communicate, get a point across, get stakeholder buy-in, get people convinced about what we're trying to tell them. And we've tried different things I want to talk to you about. We'll just share some of the lessons learned, the approach that has worked, and share with you some examples. Examples are mostly visualization examples in terms of how we visualize some of our output for the purposes of communication, for the purposes of stakeholder buy-in. Essentially, convince the people who give us money that they gave us money for good reason and to give us more money. That's what it's about. So what's the situation? Sorry, wrong situation. By the way, that guy does not look like that anymore. So what's the situation? The situation is this. We work with a ton of data. Our objective is to, for the purposes of identifying growth opportunities in retail, we analyze data sourced from different places, sourced from our own platform, contributed by some of our customers. Some of the customer logos are there. They're not the only customers. There are about, like I said, 3,000 sites running on the platform, just a sample set. We try to identify opportunities in terms of where opportunities lie. Then we help our customers implement those solutions. So once we find an opportunity, we help them sort of pursue those opportunities to help them sort of realize those opportunities. In that, we partner. We're not the team that actually does the implementation. We partner with other parts of the organization to pursue those implementations. And then we help them measure performance. So once the solution's been implemented, has it been effective? Then we evaluate, improve, and then it's a sort of there's a feedback loop there. So the stakeholders here are our customers, so retailers. And if you've never worked in retail, it's only modernizing in the past couple of years. Until then, it was stuck in legacy technology. One of the most sort of industries where legacy technology was so embedded that there was a lack of modernization, both in terms of what technology worked in retail and how people thought about it. And we take a lot of data to do the things that we do. So we realized that what we end up accomplishing for our retailers is we help them sort of travel their own internal analytics journey. That's an actual slide from a customer presentation that we did. So all the stuff that you see on the right is stuff that was relevant for the customer. It's just a sample set of stuff that we tell them to do. But the analytics maturity spectrum is fairly cookie cutter, and sort of everybody, or almost most retailers that we work with, have traveled that path. So in this example slide that I took from an actual presentation, that particular customer was at that state in their analytics journey, and we wanted to get them to the place where we've indicated as target state. And to do that, they had to do four things that are listed on the other side of the slide. While we are investing in helping retailers pursue those growth opportunities, we realized that we're actually helping them travel in their own analytics journey. To help them do that, we have to help convince them to come along, to tag along with us, to follow us in our journey, to help them sort of travel, improve their own internal maturity model. So that's the situation. Now, there's a complication here. The complication is not all stakeholders, not all business users are created equal, right? In my experience, we've found that there are 4 types of business users. These are actually really funny stuff. So if you want to read, take your time to read. On the top left, users who are more visually driven, who go more for the sizzle than the steak, who are more impressed by the color and the sort of the impact of what you're trying to communicate rather than the meat of the stuff itself. It's nobody's blaming anybody. It's just how their brain works, right? There's that type of users. Then on the top right, there are types of users who want to know everything. How did you exactly arrive at this conclusion? Show me the details. Tell me everything that's in your path to a solution. Did you use machine learning? Did you use basic regression modeling? Was it just basic quadratic equations? Whatever that is, just let me know because I want to know every single detail. On the bottom left, users who like to see charts because they are more of folks who are more of exploratory mindset, who like to explore and figure out their own solution. So give me a bunch of charts. Let me just figure this out myself. I want to understand how you arrived at the conclusion, but I want to do it at my own pace. And at the bottom right, people who are fairly hands-off, who don't really care how we got to the solution. They just want to use the solution and sort of run with it. So those are the 4 types of users. So when we do our work, when we take our output to a business user, a business stakeholder, we have to think about what type of person are we talking about? We cannot articulate and communicate in the same manner to all users taking the same output. We have to sort of reposition our output in different ways and different shapes to speak to the type of user we are talking to. And that's the complication. The complication is about customizing the output to the type of user we're talking to. There's one more layer of complication, and that's the whole trust verify matrix piece. Imagine you're either a data scientist or a machine learning engineer. You've been given a problem. You modeled it. You take the solution. You're talking to whoever gave you the problem. You're talking to that person. Chances are that person falls into one of these 4 quadrants, and the way you are going to be communicating to them depends on where your relationship with that person falls in one of these 4 quadrants. Think about it. Let's say the person you're talking to has blind trust in you. It's actually awesome. If your relationship with that person is on the top left, where it's high on trust and low on verification criteria, then chances are they're going to take your output. They're not going to verify, but it's not really best case scenario because it's blind spot driven. Here's an example. This actually happened yesterday. So Doug, can you raise your hand, please? So Doug's one of our primary principal data scientists. So Doug and I were talking to a customer at 5:30 p.m. And the topic of conversation was web page performance. So we run e-commerce sites. So e-commerce sites, web page performance, site performance, page load times, first byte load times, document split times. These are all important KPIs. And we divide a site by categories of pages: home page, product landing page, product details page, shopping cart, checkout, the normal stuff. So this site was a little weird, as in the product landing page looked like a product details page. So we thought we got it covered. And as we were verifying the solution before we were getting on the call at 5:30 p.m., we realized that we miscategorized a type of page. So even though there's a blind trust in the team, you have to verify it so that blind spots can be identified. It was an honest mistake. We just missed it because the site was of different type. So, long story short, blind trust on that top left corner is a great, comfortable spot to be in, but it doesn't always work out. A great, healthy spot to be in is in the top right, trust but verify. If your stakeholder trusts your judgment, but would like to verify, would like you to walk them through how you got to the output, great situation to be in. Take that as an option, take that as an indication of a healthy relationship, and preserve it. If you're on the bottom right, where there's lack of trust, and your stakeholder wants you to help them verify how you got to the output, it's not all bad. If there's a healthy dose of skepticism in your stakeholders, in your users' purview of your output, it's not all bad. Trust can be built over time. Trust can be built over time by consistently delivering quality output. That way you can move the relationship to the bottom right. If you're on the bottom left, you're screwed. Your stakeholder does not want to verify or talk about your solution. Your stakeholder does not, your business user does not want to, doesn't trust your solution. There's a fundamental problem in that relationship. Success is probably not gonna come easy. So understanding where you are in your business user conversation is very important, is what we're trying to say. So this is the complication. In this type of a complicated situation, how do you take your output and how do you have a meaningful conversation with your business users? That's the struggle that's not the struggle, but that's the journey we've gone through over the past several months. And what I wanted to share with you, all that was a setup for the next 5 slides. I'm going to warn you, it's going to sound a little preachy, but it's not. It actually works in real life. Also, it may sound a little redundant because it's not very different from what Angela was talking about earlier at iRobot, what Sim was talking about at Swoop, or what Dave was talking about at Spotify. Sorry, Google, the image classification talk, and this has no relationship, so. I also realized that several things that we do actually map well to concepts that have existed in different industries. Angela from iRobot was talking about looking at other industries for inspiration. Let me show you some examples of where we've actually looked at other industries for inspiration in this particular subject matter, in this particular problem area. The first one's coming up here. Has anybody read this book, Essentialism? It was on the New York Times bestseller list. The book is kind of but I saw the cover of the book and I was smitten. I was like, this is exactly what I do. I take stuff that looks like that and make it look like this. And that's what I want to be able to talk to my customers and business users about. So I read the book and I realized that a lot of the stuff that the book talks about in a very philosophical way actually applies to data, applies to analytics, applies to data science, applies to machine learning. So I call this data essentialism. Essentialism basically says it's not about getting more done in less time, it is about getting the right things done. What that means is you will have to choose to not do certain things. So there's a cost. There's an opportunity cost built into writing that statement. So data essentialism is about then not about conveying every single bit of insight you gleaned, not about conveying every single bit of output that you derived, but about only conveying the right insights, the stuff that has the most impact. If there's any of the whole presentation, if there's anything that you take away, please let this be the slide that you take away. So there are things that you can do to hone in, to have a bigger impact in your insight communication. The question you have to ask is, would you rather make a millimeter of progress in a million different things, or would you rather gain maximum momentum in one thing? Would you rather communicate 15 different ideas to your user and sort of nudge them one step closer to a yes, or convincing them of the output of 10 different things? Or would you rather focus on one thing and take them all the way from skepticism to agreement? And I would argue that there's value in focusing on the one thing and focusing all your energy in not inundating them with hundreds of things, but focusing on one output, one particular information, one particular insight, one particular nugget, and using that to getting them from, okay, I'm going to start listening to you now, to, holy crap, that was awesome. Thank you very much for telling that to me. No. So you've heard the statement, if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. And you've heard, if you don't prioritize your career, someone else will. Well, if you don't prioritize your insights, someone else will. Help them focus on the needle in the haystack. Don't let them search for the needle. Just Take their hand and take them and show them the needle. Here's the needle in the haystack. Forget the hay, forget the different types of hay that may exist. So help them sort of prioritize, help them focus. Now, that's the principle of data essentialism. Now let's talk quickly about how to get there. So in the book, the book talks about evaluate, illuminate, and execute, and that totally applies to data, to intelligence, to insights, to data science. It's a 3E framework. I call it a framework because the 3 things that you have to do. It's easy to remember, but it's not as easy to execute. The hardest thing to do is evaluation. How do you evaluate, of all the things that you want to communicate, what will make the highest contribution towards the goal? In our case, we look at e-commerce data, we look at retail transaction data, and we try to distill nuggets of growth opportunities for businesses. On one hand, we could find that a retailer has to invest in social marketing a lot because Instagram's influence on e-commerce is increasing, or digital commerce in general increasing. That could be one nugget. The other nugget could be that they have opportunities in improving their user experience. Sometimes the website may just suck design-wise, and that could be another opportunity that they could focus on. Another opportunity could be that their email marketing programs could be made better by introducing machine learning AI stuff in it, like abandoned cart email marketing programs and so on. So we may come up with a bevy of things, of opportunities that as a retailer, as a brand, our customers could focus, could pursue. However, talking about every single thing, communicating every single thing to them may not get us to where we want to go. And our goal is to help them become more successful in their business. So we have to prioritize what's of these options, which one has the highest possible contribution towards the goal. How do we separate the vital few from the trivial many that exist in that output that we have that we want to communicate? So that's the first step. The second step is querwitz, I think. Know what you really want to say. I've struggled with this several times, personally. When I have a lot of things, a lot of interesting insights, a lot of interesting anecdotal insights that I want to take to my business users, I initially would just data puke. By the way, it's a technical term. We use it often. Look it up. And we would do that, and that would just fly over people's heads. They wouldn't focus on the stuff that was most important. So before getting in front of business user, before getting in front of stakeholders, I would think about, what is it that I really want to say here? What is it that I really want to focus here? This is actually borrowed from content marketing, from the field of content marketing. So if you were to write a blog for someone, you have to decide on the core premise of the blog. You need to really know what you want to say before you actually start writing the blog post. It's the same thing here. Is the same concept borrowed from that field applied to this field. Next thing you need to do is eliminate stuff. Hopefully, if you've done a great job, I'm sure you guys do a phenomenal job in your own fields, you have a lot of interesting, useful, targeted, meaningful analysis to share. Now, when you get to a point where you want to eliminate stuff that you don't want to talk about, and there will be stuff that you want to eliminate from the conversation, maybe as you construct a slide deck, put that stuff in the appendix. Beware of sunk cost bias. Sunk cost bias is a real thing. Sunk cost bias is stuff that makes it's the human tendency to behave irrationally in situations that may not be optimal because of the sunk cost in it. I'm sure all of you probably have examples of it in your personal life, if you think about it a little bit. Just don't want to share too much on the sunk cost bias. But once you've done the analysis, there might be situations where you may feel like you don't want to abandon or ignore a part of the output, a part of the of your final sort of inside your package, because you may feel like you spent a lot of effort in getting there, right? And that may actually work against you. So sunk cost bias is a real thing when it comes to honing in on the needle in the haystack, and could get in the way of eliminating the right thing. The third E is execute. Execution, in terms of how you package everything and how you communicate. These are some common sense no-brainers. It's not rocket science. Follow good data visualization principles. I have some examples at the end of the slide where sometimes the most simplistic heuristics-based visualization mechanisms have been found the most effective. We tend to skew towards some of the more simpler, traditional visualization techniques than any of the new, recently released ones. And I have some examples for what good visualization principles are later. Bias on impact over information. When you're communicating, this happened, actually, same example as last night. The same client, 5:30 p.m. conversation. Impact over information. We had information on number of bytes loaded on the page, total number of URL redirects, image requests, and page weight, and so on and so forth. Our user was solely focused on total number of images embedded on a page. He was solely focused on understanding our opinion on how they have leveraged images on their web pages. So the conversation sort of honed in on the image analysis part of it, and we steered away from all the other stuff because we wanted to create more impact at the expense of giving him all the information. Instead of inundating him with information, we just focused on the stuff that was most impactful, talked about images all evening long. So focusing on impact, creating impact on the other side of the table instead of sharing information is critical. You need to understand whether the user is in explanatory mode or exploratory mode. As in, is it one output that he or she is looking an explanation for, or is that person going to take your information and start to sort of explore, weave through the analysis that you've done to sort of get to a better state of understanding of the analysis that you're presenting. That may sort of narrow your options of what type of packaging, what type of positioning you may want to use before you take the output to the user. Appeal over accuracy. Sometimes we have to sacrifice accuracy for the purposes of appeal. And here's what I mean. This sort of goes into sort of infographics realm. Sometimes, to make an impact, instead of taking the output of a ggplot or any other standard visualization packages that we have that generates an accurate output of the model that's running on the data, we recreate that output in a more appealing manner using standard image making software like Photoshop and stuff like that. Only because it's a lot more, we have creative freedom to make the output look more appealing to the eyes. And when we do that, when we sort of put more creative juice into the output, we found that it is received better. And for us, getting it received better is more important most often than not, instead of accuracy. And this applies to when you're talking to a business user, when you talk to a stakeholder, and you want them to understand your output and You want to get them from a no to yes, from an acceptance and business investments perspective. And finally, welcome skepticism and criticism. When you welcome skepticism, what it means is they are involved. They're now putting skin in the game. If they're putting skin in the game, you're in. If they're putting skin in the game, it means that they are not tuned out. They are not dialed away. It means that they're tuned in. They are investing in your thinking. They are investing their time, their mental energy, their mental bandwidth into your output. And that is a great sign. So you should always welcome skepticism and criticism of your work. Remember, human brain hates thinking, right? We love to not to think. Netflix binging is a thing because we hate thinking. So if you make someone think, kudos to you. You've done half the battle's won right there. So that's key part of execution. Now, like I mentioned, good visualization principles. Connecting this dot to something I mentioned earlier, borrowing concepts from adjacent industries, from other industries, something that Angela from iRobot was talking about. Here's what I found interesting. Of all the fields that have contributed to our growth, surprisingly, behavioral psychology has had an interesting impact. Specifically, Gestalt principles of perception. Actually, Gestalt principles, just search this on the interwebs. I hear there's a good search engine that does a decent job of getting information out. I forget the name, but I'm sure you know. Especially, you know what? Do an image search on Gestalt principles. This is a part of behavioral psychology that focuses on cognitive thinking, cognitive behaviors. And the principles are, as you can see, talk about proximity, similarity, enclosure, closure, continuity, connection. Now these concepts, almost all of these concepts, translate to have an application in data science. For example, let's say there's a problem for which there's a clustering problem and we used k-means clustering to model something and get to an output. That is actually a proximity problem. K-means is about the Euclidean distance between 2 points and trying to figure out how they cluster together. Now, how does that map to Gestalt principles? In Gestalt principles of perception, there are proven visualization methods that can be leveraged to communicate proximity. And those methods have stood the test of time for decades. They are not newfangled methods that some data visualization technology vendor came up with. These are methods that have stood the test of time in communicating the concept of proximity, communicating the concept of similarity from one person to another. So we found those principles, the images associated with those principles, really relevant in communicating the concept of proximity, concept of similarity that we want our business users to understand from an output of a model. Before we move on to some examples, I just want to reiterate source and perception is really, really important. Going back to the trust matrix, this is what we found out. We found out that if the insight or whatever the output is comes from a trusted source, people are slightly biased. They are more likely to believe it if they trust the source. So therefore, it's more important to earn the trust of the user you're talking to help them sort of believe in what you're bringing to the table. There's some research that's been done that suggests that people look at data like the data that confirms their beliefs. So there's confirmation bias. You guys probably know a lot more about confirmation bias than I do, but confirmation bias is a real thing. Product owners like me deal with it on a daily basis because when we turn around and talk to our stakeholders, when we tell them something that they don't like or they don't believe in, it takes more mental energy, more time, more investment from our part to take that output, convince them, and have them change their beliefs, change their decisions. People don't want to change their beliefs. Making people change their beliefs, even through data, is very, very hard. Unless you have trust built into that relationship, making them change their beliefs is hard. But on the other hand, if you take an insight that they already sort of believe in, if it's sort of substantiating their hunch, it's super easy to convince a business stakeholder to understand, to sort of get on your side. So that is how the concepts behind data essentialism help us construct, position, package our data science and machine learning output to business users, to stakeholders, to people who make investment decisions for us. I just wanted to share some examples of stuff that has worked in the past. These are examples of output that we have taken to retailers, digital commerce leaders, directors, VPs of commerce, in helping them understand what the data is saying and what they should do about it. So some quick examples. These are very fundamental, rudimentary. There's just to prove a point that there's beauty in simplification, elegant simplification, like Angela mentioned, is a thing. We've learned that it is important for us to simplify our findings, our output, our communication in an easy to understand manner. So when we are communicating trends, no surprises here. Bar charts and line charts work best. There are several different ways to showcase, portray trends, but in this case, I mean, the actual data is irrelevant. If you really are interested, it represents how much, what sort of an impact search box, the ability to search an e-commerce site has an impact on other aspects of the overall commerce experience across multiple verticals like health and beauty, luxury apparel, and so on and so forth, and how that trend has changed. So this is trend representation. We have found no other mechanism that is far more effective than simple histograms, simple line charts to represent trends. Distribution. Big fan of violent plots. Distributions, there's this one sort of service that we provide. It's called benchmarking. What we do is we take a retailer like a New Balance or an Adidas or a L'Oreal, and we help them compare and contrast their business performance with a custom cohort, with a cohort of similar retailers and brands. When we do benchmarking, people always want to understand, if my conversion rate is 5%, how are my peers doing? Are my peers converting at 7%? Are they converting at 2%? Now, that 5% is an average, and we all know the fallacy of averages. So what we do is instead of communicating to them about in averages, we show them distribution. We show them distribution across different verticals, across, this obviously represents distribution of that KPI, checkout rate, across multiple years, and each color is an industry vertical. For obvious confidentiality reasons, I removed a couple of labels from that chart, but each color represents an industry, so that the retailer can then understand not just the fact that checkout rate averaging at 60%, but how does that spread look like, and where is the spread concentrated at, so that they can then have a good conversation with their team around, okay, is that healthy for us? Are we aligned with the industry that we're playing in? And if you're not healthy, what should we do to improve the health of the system? And if you're healthy, if we're doing great, phenomenal, celebrate the accomplishment, and move on. Regression equations. Tried representing them as equations, didn't work. Now we represent them as tree charts. Dependent variable on top, independent variables or nodes. Your weights and your factors are represented right there. What this does to them is when we are actually projecting it on the screen and talking to them about how each independent variable is influencing the dependent variable, we literally have people sort of taking markers, sort of circling a KPI, talking about who owns that KPI in the team. Like, for example, let's say the first metric is traffic to the site. There's someone who owns digital marketing, who owns traffic generation for a commerce site. They can have this conversation around who owns that variable, what are they going to do about either improving it or keeping it healthy, and who owns the next variable, and they can literally sort of draw a sub-chart underneath it and talk about plans to improve those KPIs. So translating that into this manner really helps business users visually think about how their business is doing and what sort of plan they should be making to address some of those opportunities they have. When measuring user experience, nothing really comes close to annotated heat maps. We found annotated heat maps super, super useful in helping people see what is going great and what is going wrong on their properties. We just don't throw heat maps at them. We actually annotate heat maps and throw it at them. And this really helps people visually see where their opportunities are and what to do about it. So these are some of the examples that I wanted to share with you guys. So summary being, while dragon makers are important and they make powerful dragons, people who fund the dragon makers' efforts may have to be brought into the conversation with a different set of, in a different language construct, different terminology. The way that they are involved needs to be slightly different, very similar to what Dave was talking about in terms of how you communicate to a product owner. You have to really train the product owner. Similar to that, you have to really train your business stakeholder. You have to really train your investor. And to really train your investor, you sometimes have to speak their language. To really speak their language, you need to understand what's your relationship status with them. Sometimes your relationship status with them could be trust but verify. Sometimes that relationship status could be it's complicated. When it's complicated, it becomes challenging in getting more investments to invest in maturing your internal processes, to invest in experimental ML infrastructure, to invest in new headcount, and so on and so forth. So we've realized that putting on an additional lens of data essentialism helps in translating the Dragon Maker output to business speak. And if there's one takeaway from this presentation, which I thank you for sticking around, is simplification and focusing on the absolute essentials is critical in bringing business users and investors and stakeholders on board for the future success of data science and machine learning in an organization. With that, thank you very much for your time. I move to questions.
Who's got them? Oh, come on, guys. Wake up. It's not even 5 yet. Come on. Oh. Oh, Sim.
Oh, crap.
Oh, come on. So one of the hard things you have is you have extremely limited testing bandwidth, right? Because you're talking real impactful meetings that you can't just replay several times after pressing the reset button. So if the Google guys can do classification however many times they want and have golden truth, and I worry about not being able to repeat things, having billions of ad impressions, you have a few dozen or a few hundred meetings. So how do you decide what to try when you have so limited testing bandwidth? And how do you know that what works not because of the people in front of you, as opposed to, but because of how you're presenting it? I mean, it's a super tough problem in a very, very impactful situation if you're wrong.
Yep. It's a problem that we struggle with on a daily basis, and thank you for the question. We sometimes, actually, you know what? Doug, would you like to come up on stage and maybe take a stab at this? It's actually a tough question. I need help answering that question. So we do a lot of experimentation without telling people. We block off time. We don't necessarily block off time in a structured manner. We run tests at downtimes that we don't necessarily announce, so that resource bucket is not necessarily openly shared with everybody. So people think that we are occupied, and we are. We're not just focusing on a articulated business case. We are just focusing on experiments and tests. For example, you've done some experimentation with, you've done some bunch of stuff recently.
Yeah.
Would you like to talk about what you did and how you did it?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is kind of having some sort of sanity check with different stakeholders. So we work with a lot of account managers that are kind of embedded with the customer, and they kind of really understand kind of what the persona is and have a good sense of what the overall strategy is. And so whenever we're kind of trying to model anything, typically, we have a target, it's usually revenue, and we try to keep it very simple in terms of, we don't really try to use the most crazy model. Often it's just a very simple linear model. And, we have lots of sites, so we can kind of verify if it's worked in the past with other sites, moving certain levers, certain KPIs. So, yeah, I mean, it's not 100%, but, so far we found that, we haven't had too many issues.
Does that answer your question to some extent?
Not the model. I was thinking not the modeling, but you actually testing the communication of ideas.
Yes.
You said you were doing this in fairly impactful meetings, and so what is the testing strategy around that, and do you collect feedback back? Because there you actually, you cannot do it without people knowing. You're out there talking to them. You can't say, hey, can we just redo this meeting, and I'll show you the same date in a different graph.
Yeah, painful battle scars there. Painful battle scars where, actually this happened 6 months ago. This was a very, very important meeting with the senior leadership in the organization. Went in with a bunch of analysis about how, the question was, the core premise was we need more investment. We need some extra investment in a specific area of our initiatives here. And just pummel them with data, just drown them in insight number A, number B, number C. Here are the things we're going wrong. Da 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 da. Here's the things we can do. Da 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 da. Everybody nodded their head, and they seemed like they were getting it. And I felt great about it because I had the opportunity to communicate everything that I wanted to say. Information over impact. Wasn't following my own advice. Then realized crickets. I came back from the meeting, followed up, nothing for 6 months. Turned out I squandered that opportunity. I totally screwed it up, and when I presented it, the core point that I wanted to communicate was not communicated. So battle scars, learn, live and learn, that's method number one. But method number two, to what Doug mentioned, we have folks in the field who talk to customers. We're not the only people who talk to customers. There's a customer success group, there are account execs and stuff, so on and so forth. So sometimes we actually use them to validate before we get in front of customers we have a fairly good relationship. We have allies within other functions within the organization who can help us validate, who can act as proxy for our customers. And we've used that to great extent, to good amount of success to validate that construction before we actually get in front of those guys. Sometimes the third option is actually bob and weave in live situation. Case in point, yesterday, did not know about the image importance. Went in the conversation with a spreadsheet of 7 tabs, yeah, and a slide deck of fancy charts, focused on 2 columns of 1 tab in that spreadsheet, and got stuck on slide 5 or slide 6 for 35 minutes of the conversation because they were interested in that part of the insight. So Bob and Weave decided to change the strategy at runtime and just focused on that part. So those are the 3 things we've done.
Any other questions? Oh.
So the idea of being able to communicate in a way that the customer understands is something that requires a certain amount of discipline. You've got to basically stop doing your analysis at some point and switch to thinking about how you're going to present it. And that's not necessarily something that as data scientists we get taught in schools. We're sort of doing an analysis up until the point the project is due to be handed in. How do you build that discipline in your team to sort of shift gears and actually not spend 99% of the time running numbers?
Well, I'll let you answer your part because you're half of the solution,
Yeah.
or half of the problem, however you want to state it. See, I'm telling you, next team meeting, thanks Dave, it's going to be very awkward. Yeah. Internal experiments. I skew towards simplicity. So we're the yin and yang. I skew towards superficial simplicity sometimes, not elegant simplicity. And he skews towards verbose, information-dense communication. Sometimes it's just talking and finding the right middle ground. For one-offs, for one-on-one customer engagements, that's actually easier. When that strategy sort of gets more risky is when we are trying to productize that output. When we are trying to build that into a product that has to be scaled across tens to hundreds of users, then the decisions that we make has to scale to all those users. Then that agreement has to be systematized. And for that, we leverage a lot of alpha testing and beta testing before we roll something out to understand whether the way we are articulating this business value proposition actually makes sense or not. Actually, I just remembered one example. So we built this application, the benchmarking use case that I just talked about. We built this as an application so that people in the field, customer-facing account execs, can deliver benchmark insights to their customers at any given point of time. Initially, we thought this is going to be a fancy visualization tool that is going to help them benchmark in different types of charts. There's going to be an explosion of colors on the dashboard and so on and so forth. Turned out, people just wanted numbers. The dashboard literally now is a table of colorful numbers, and that's all it is. Because we thought we were trying to sort of impress them visually. What they wanted was numbers because they literally pull up the dashboard, sit across the table, and talk about go number by number by number, compare their performance with their peers, see whether it's up or down, and discuss strategies to improve those numbers. So it's a table of numbers. So sometimes it skews towards data, sometimes it skews towards visualization. It's all testing.
Yeah.
Any input?
Yeah, I mean, I think for communication, it's important to be kind of patient because, the person you're trying to talk to isn't necessarily going to get everything you're saying initially. So I think that's what's kind of helpful to have open-ended questions to kind of get to the bottom of what they're actually trying to solve. So, usually, I try to keep it as simple as possible, although he says sometimes it gets a little bit too detailed. But I find, just being patient and, never being condescending, there's no stupid questions or anything like that. That helps a lot, so.
I might have one additional question to this to wrap it up. So when you're sort of planning out your sprints, do you leave, like, say it's a 5-day sprint, do you leave 4 days for actually running the machine learning part of it, pulling all the data, and like a day for actually figuring out how to visualize and, you know, interpret this data and pass it on? Is there like a ratio that you use to like really hard coding work versus?
I got to qualify that question further. 80% of the problems that we solve are basically regression problems. Our machine learning component is smaller in the grand scheme of things. Therefore, we do that, but from a different perspective, because it's not all machine learning. Most of it is basic math, stat, data science. And we actually don't do sprints.
Yeah, kind of random.
Yeah.
No
yeah.
sprints.
Yeah, no sprints. We actually do. We have two streams of work. We have projects that have a specific start and specific finish that are happening at varying lengths. Some projects are 1-month projects, some projects are 6-month projects, and so on. And those happen in traditional waterfall, not agile, for a reason. And then we have we do customer-facing work. That's like a typical Kanban style work stream for supporting customers in the field with ad hoc questions like we did marketing mix modeling for someone recently, the web page performance work that we talked about yesterday. So those are managed Kanban style. There's a queue, tasks come in, they go from swim lane to swim lane until they finish. And usually those are dedicated resources assigned to them, so that don't switch from one person to another. So those are two work streams. So for the type of work that we do, we don't need to do sprints, so we don't do sprints, but that's the two work streams that we have to accomplish what we do. Does that answer the question?
I think so. Well, with that, I think we can wrap up this day. Thank you so much to Vinod, friends.